Hello and welcome everyone to one of the concluding sessions for the day of the first annual conference. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the MCAA for giving me this wonderful opportunity to experience the city of Córdoba while networking with brilliantly talented people, and for our honorable to join us today and discuss the intriguing topic of the importance of cultural diversity in the context of communication, research culture, and diplomacy. A French-born American novelist, Annis Nin, once said, "We don't see things as they are, we see them." I want you to take a brief moment and let these words sink in. We can look at the same things, but see them differently. We can hear the same language, but understand different meanings. Our perception of the world is inevitably colored by our cultural experiences. So, what is culture, and how does it impact our day-to-day? By definition, culture is an umbrella term that encompasses the social behavior, institutions, and norms found in human societies. It is often attributed to a specific region or location. But in today's intercontinental and international society, where people recognize themselves as citizens of the world, how does culture expand, liberate, unify, and divide us? Culture is a learned process around which we continuously gather cues of behavior and social conduct that are guided by interactions with our external environment. This could be through arts, language, food, our religious beliefs, and ancient or modern customs that together contribute to the acquired knowledge and skills we utilize to interact in our day-to-day. A country's culture has long borne the responsibility of unifying its people, maintaining social decorum and acceptable demeanors. It has helped in setting societal expectations, thus imparting socio-economic stability, along with increased tolerance, health, and well-being of its individuals and communities. However, a monoculture society bears great risks of lack of strategic and functional response to ever-evolving global challenges. Even in ecological farming, it is known that growing the same crops increases the risks of diseases and pests and sets a negative feedback cycle. And although diversifying the fauna or societal cultural awareness is a natural measure to curb diseases and increase productivity, it of course comes with its own sets of challenges. So what does cultural diversity really entail? Cultural diversity is often interchanged with multiculturalism. It is a social aspect of recognizing, accepting, and appreciating the differences, not only limited to race, religion, and a belief system, but stretching far and beyond to varying interests, skills, and most importantly, our social needs. A diverse society not only dispels negative stereotypes and inherent biases, but broadens our understanding of different ways of being, enriching the society with values of empathy and compassion. Additionally, it offers a solution-oriented mindset with multiple problem-solving techniques for interculturally complex issues, inspiring creativity and driving global societal innovation and economic growth. However, diversity and complexity are like the yin and yang in ontology. One cannot exist without the other, and both contribute to the society equally. What is normal to me might not be normal to you, or vice versa. And also, who gets to decide what is normal or abnormal anyway? The inability to comprehend differences in people's ideologies and values can easily create misunderstandings and cultural clashes. Although it is impossible to always appease everyone, we can at least work on our own cultural self-awareness. We all have cultural biases that influence our subconscious behavior and awareness. But it is only when we identify these inherent biases that we can initiate the process of truly accepting our cultural differences. So how does scientific communication, research culture, and diplomacy play a role in the mix of societal cultural complexity? Well, an academic environment not only has the potential, but bears the responsibility of respectfully representing diversity. How we communicate science determines societal awareness and progress. Research culture doesn't just determine how researchers interact with their colleagues, families, or society at large, but also influences their research efficiency and economic contribution. And in the words of Sir Joseph Banks, the science of two nations may be at peace while their politics are at war. Scientific diplomacy holds the power to transcend national, religious, and cultural boundaries, offering a neutral environment to exchange ideas between diverse people, communities, and sectors. To dissect and discuss these measures further, I now invite the panel to join me. If you could please briefly introduce yourselves and also share your ideas on why is it important to acknowledge these cultural differences in your respective areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pooja. Very nice introductory speech. So I'm Joana, and introducing myself. Well, I like to have time for me, my work, my family, and my friends, and of course for nature as well. And I believe in science and innovation for the benefit of humankind. And that's why I dedicate my professional life to the field of science. So my background is biology. I conducted research for 10 years, and currently I'm a social business innovator in the fields of science, communication, and career development. I've worked in 8 different countries throughout my professional life. Across 2 different continents, and of course by doing this I've come across with lots of people from different parts of the world and different institutional cultures as well. I believe it is important to acknowledge cultural differences because only by doing this we can really work towards a society that is tolerant and builds by giving voice to people coming from we have access to a diversity of thought, and with this comes new ideas and new solutions to the world's problems. It's also important, the acknowledgement of cultural differences in terms of accessing different types of information and different types of opportunities. So for a fair access to different opportunities, to be aware of biases that sometimes we have and be aware of cultural differences can be very crucial. Finally, I'm an advocate for a way of living where more than many times we spend our thoughts in trying to fit into a new community, a new city, a new institution, the groups that are around you. And I'm an advocate for us to spend more time reaching out to others than trying to fit in. And if we can build this bridge through I think a lot of progression can be made in terms of having all the different voices be heard in a table.
Is this, yes, it's on. I think I need to put it quite close. So my name's Karen. I also really very much value a balance, although I manage quite a big portfolio of activities, and I've really shaped that according to my interests. I also find it very important to balance that with family life, with other activities. The main things I'm involved in is I manage a portfolio of activities. I work part-time for the Royal Society of Chemistry in the UK, which is a professional body for chemists, where I'm leading the research and innovation policy team. The other part of my week is dedicated to freelance consultancy services via culture-based consulting. So it's all really kind of focused on improving research culture. And then I'm also active as a volunteer. I'm still supporting the activities of the MCAA, the policy activities, but also I'm a board member for Euroscience and the vice chair of the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. And the way to combine all these things is that they really coalesce around one topic, which is the topic of culture and improving culture. And to answer Pooja's first question on why culture and cultural differences and respecting those is important, especially in research environments, I think the first thing to recognize there is that research environments often are incredibly international. I think that's a strength of science, but it can also lead to challenges, because it means we need to work together with people from different backgrounds, with different cultural habits, sometimes different appreciations of what is and isn't appropriate. And on the one hand, this is a richness that I think is beneficial to the generation of ideas, to the creativity of teams. But it can be challenging because it means we need to do lots of effort to understand different communication styles, to also understand how conflict works, both in what are the kind of things that can cause conflict, but also how they can be resolved. And in that context, it's very important to develop skills to overcome those challenges in general, but in particular in research environments. And I've really seen this gone wrong, and I strongly believe that where it goes wrong, it doesn't only affect the people, but it also can really affect the quality of the research. It can result in collaborations that could have happened that don't take place. It can result in toxic behaviors within research environments. I think it's very important that there is room to work on these transferable skills around appreciating and understanding different cultures and really learning to communicate with each other. I think communication is one of the key concepts there, and I'll end there for now because I think there's much more time to discuss in more detail.
Thank you, Karen. So before I talk about my point, I would like to thank the organizer of the session for such a wonderful panel and such a diverse panel, champions from different fields. So I'm really, really glad to be there, and I'm really glad to be the minority. My name is Mostafa. I have quite an interesting career. I originally come from Bangladesh, and then I moved to Europe in 2008 to do my master's in nanotechnology, and then I did I worked at a university in Belgium, then my PhD in Austria to postdoc, and after one point of time, I moved from academia to industry. In between, I also work in the non-profit, different non-profit as a volunteer. One of them was, of course, in MCAA. I was actually involved from the beginning. Then I helped our Austrian chapter, followed by 2 years as a vice chair of the association and chair, now as the executive director. So as you can see, I do have, like other panelists, of course, I come from, I do have a variety of cultures where I actually stayed and encountered. So the question was to me that what role it plays, especially for diplomatic relations. I would actually take two of the points what one Joana and one Karen said. If you talk about the diplomacy, it's basically building bridges. Yeah? And when you want to build bridge, and the second point comes from actually Karen, is basically communication is the key. And if you would like to make really effective communication, you would need to know the cultural differences. There are, I do not come from the diplomatic sector, but my father was a diplomat, so I do know that the culture can play a really crucial role when you make the international negotiation, be it for pandemic, whether you close the border or not, or be it for different type of funding for example, the Ebola research. In all these cases, culture play a very crucial role, because first you need to understand what the other person wants, so basically their mindset, and this mindset is integrated into the culture they are grown into. So one is the geographical culture, we would say, but another is the culture of the work itself. So if it is diplomacy, then it's the diplomatic culture that is different than the scientist. And in science diplomacy, for example, just to take it to a bit more further, we have two different cultures other than the geographic culture. Is basically the scientists, they talk in a language which only scientists would understand. I know this room is almost full of scientists, but you know that time to time, I'm generalizing a bit, sorry for that, we are not the great communicator. And then we have the diplomacy, yeah? And they talk in a completely different language. So you need to bridge the gap between the culture of the geographical differences, but also the culture between the topics itself. So I hope I could answer the question, yeah.
Thanks. No, not working. Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you to all the panelists for introducing themselves and to answer why it is so important to address the important issue of cultural diversity in the different sectors. If I may just carry on with what you just said about, science and diplomatic relationships with different countries, are you able to comment on some of the challenging aspects in conflict resolution? Why, when you have diversity, of course, it's giving you different opinions and pool of ideas, but could you, from your personal experience or professional experiences, gauge some examples of where you find challenges by including those kind of diverse opinions, and how do you really tackle these when you're implementing into policy making, be it in science, diplomacy, or outside?
Yeah, there are. Can you hear me? I think, yeah, okay. So, yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Actually, there are a lot of examples I could remember right now, but one of the prime example would be we had the chance to go to South Africa for the World Science Forum. And there, I have to say, I have an eye-opening experience, not because of the World Science Forum is basically scientists, well, it's similar like the World Economic Forum, but mainly for scientists and policymakers. But this year's panel, it's a week-long program, but this year's panel, I was blown away by the reply and the engagement from the local community who were the audience, not the speakers. And there, I reflect of one of the example of one of the audience who basically raised this question. So two. One is when we basically do, be it at the policy making, be it even some scientific evidence, we do not always take a representative sample. We do not actually consider the diversity. Just to give you an example, in some cases, even in medical sector, some of the parameters, whether you have that disease or not, these parameters are actually based on white male. And that question was coming from one of the audience but you see that parameter is even used everywhere, even in Africa, and that defines whether your disease is, whether your treatment is paid by the insurance company or not. So you see how unfair it is, and because we are not diverse enough, we are not basically counting all the different examples. There were a lot of others, like even in academia. I mean, I just talked about this in the earlier session. Whenever we talk about the diversity, we always talk about a specific group, the group we know. We do not think about beyond our world, and this is the reason why we need the representative in any policy making is as diverse as possible.
Well, taking on those points and talking about research culture, in a day-to-day setting, you know, academia especially is so rich with international researchers, international PIs. How do we break the ice? How do we actually give values around cultural diversity to academics? How do we bring that into practice?
Is this working? Yeah. I mean, it's not an easy question to answer. I think that's the first thing to say. Creating a positive culture, I think in any organization is a challenge. And I think what makes it perhaps more challenging in academia, and that's partly from my own experience, is that there is not that much attention in the way that career progression works on how we behave. There's a lot of attention on other things, but not so much on the approaches that we take to collaboration, to networking, to management. I think that's an important one. I think leadership is important in defining a culture. And these are things that are not recognized, I believe, as much as perhaps in other sectors, or not emphasized as much. So I think one of the ways to improve the diversity, but also the communication aspect, is to emphasize these aspects more in assessments, and I mean all forms of assessment, in the questions that we ask to allocate funding, in the questions that we ask to hire someone, to promote someone. And I think a lot of this has really to do with reflecting on oneself. So there's a way in which you can encourage people to reflect on how they behave, on how they learn to understand others, learn to communicate with others. And of course, training is an important part of that. But I've seen over and over again in academia where trainings are offered, people often don't attend them because there are more important things to focus on that will lead to a publication that, you know, these things don't result in. So I do think there are different ways in which this can be facilitated. Training is one of them, but the incentive system needs to encourage that people find this important, and it doesn't really work that way at the moment. So I think that's where a lot of the current problems stem from. So there's quite a lot of work to do to improve that. On the other hand, I think scientists are also often in a very good place in terms of their environment to learn these skills, because they are exposed to people from a lot of different nationalities. So if they get the right support, I think they could really be ahead in terms of being able to understand that landscape and maybe follow careers such as in diplomacy.
Karen, speaking about science communication, you know, how can we use open science communication as a tool to promote cultural diversity both within academia and outside in the community?
Yes, this question about open science is actually, it has multi-dimensions because I think a scientist typically thinks about publishing their articles in open access journals, but this is not enough. 75% of the world does not speak English, and these articles are written in English and are read in English. So it's not open science because it's not accessible to all, even though there is no paywall, right? And so I think if we really want to talk about open science, we need to also talk about science as a way to promote social justice and a fair access to information. And I think this is where science communication can play a big role. And communication is a two-way process. It's not just publishing a paper or just publishing or send a press release to a journalist. This is a one-way communication, which is not communication, right? Communication, by definition, involves creating a dialogue. So you give as much as you receive. And I think it's important that we have this in mind, both in relation to our research, but also in relation to our interpersonal relationships with the people around us. And I'm sure all of us here can give many, many examples of things that happened to us, that kind of discriminated us, or made us feel like the black sheep of the group or something like that. I think it's common that these things happen. And what we can do to change these is really to think about using not only a way of communication that is effective and creates a dialogue, but also that is inclusive. And to be inclusive, we need to be very careful of the language we use and of the images we choose to put on a slide or the resources we provide. They need to cater for different styles of preferences in terms of learning, in terms of communication, in terms of understanding information. So it does mean bringing more complexity, like it means making things more simple, but at the same time it means that when we communicate, the process becomes more complex because it's not just me talking to an audience like I'm doing now. Okay? So yeah, that would be very good to get some questions from you and also answer them.
Can I quickly? So yeah, I think it's working now. So what you said is really, really important because, as I said, we take things for granted pretty easily. And I give you a practical example from MCAA. In 2018, one of the members actually came to me and said that we could do more for the researchers with different abilities. Yeah. Now we have a task force, and that task force actually Alexandra, who got the Social Impact Award last year, and she did a fantastic job, and she helped us realize that the way we were conducting our conference, it's not accessible, and it's not diverse for specific group of people. So, I mean, she even talked about the font and really in detail, which we, I would say that normally we do not think about it. Yeah? And another, this is the reason from, I think, from 2020, the COVID time, I lost count of the years of the COVID years, but it was probably 2020. From 2020, we started to use an accessible live stream, basically. So the subtitle, what you see, is really accessible. And we put a lot of effort on that because now we have a task force who basically tell us what we can and cannot do. So this is really important to make to, number one, what you said, effectively communicate, but it's a two-way, and then listen to what is needed and how we could enable a bit more.
Certainly, and it kind of makes me, remember my own experiences during my PhD and talking about like communication, although you're trying to bring awareness outside the scientific community as well, but then it does increase the dangers of disseminating science to maybe a set of people who are very sensitive around a particular topic. So for example, I worked in animal research, and sometimes you can't justify using animals, killing animals for the sake of human progress. So how do you although you're trying to increase awareness, inclusion, dissemination, education, how do you take sensitive issues like that, which are important for science, important for awareness, but to a set of people who aren't either in line to what you believe in, or they don't have much experience to understand the justification that you have behind the science?
The fact that it's not easy, it's not an excuse to not do it, right? The important thing is to do it with touch and grace and in a way that builds trust first. Of course, you wouldn't enter a room that that believes in creation and not evolution, and you would go there and, you're all wrong, evolution is the thing. This would not be productive, right? This would not engage that people which have a cultural belief in a dialogue. It could actually create conflict. So I think it's important. I don't think we should see these differences in beliefs as dangerous or threats. I think it's important to practice reaching out, but reaching out in a way that there is, in a purposeful way, purposeful way, meaning that you want to build bridges, you want to understand why they believe in what they believe, and then you want to share your opinion with them. And if you are okay in practicing active listening and listening to them, they will be more willing to also practice active listening with you, right? So I think the solution is always to try to find harmony and build bridges for constructing a society that is more tolerant and cohesive. Hiding or ignoring these opportunities, it's not the way forward, right? The way forward is the dialogue. So even if it's difficult, we should try it.
Yes, if I can add to that, I definitely agree that it's important to be open, and we don't always have to agree with each other. I think if we're listening and we're respectful, that is more important. We also need to remember that there are some cases where it's clear we will disagree probably towards the end of the conversation, but I think there are other areas where it's not so black and white. If we think about ethical dilemmas, the discussions around also AI, for example, I think animal testing, there's actually been a lot of change as well in the last years. Those conversations, they evolve over time, and what is acceptable today might not be acceptable tomorrow, and the only way to follow the process of where the society puts its boundaries is to talk and to listen to each other. So I do think there is not enough conversations about ethics in research. There are a lot of ethical questions that we are not maybe discussing enough. So I think there is really a need for openness and to listen. And to also keep an eye on how the boundaries of what is acceptable and not are shifting, because they will change and they will continue to change.
I definitely agree to that, and I think as you just mentioned, we don't always have to be interacting with like-minded people, because if we are looking for growth, I think some sort of positive conflict could go a long way, especially when we talk about science diplomacy, right? Like, you have all these new ideas. Not all ideas are right, not all ideas are wrong, they're just different. And it's so important to appreciate those differences, not just culturally, but individually, right? But I think as society, we choose to go for the easier route, look for like-minded people, and feel comfortable in our secured niche of, oh, we're from the same stream of science, we're from the same country, we just look for commonalities so much that differences kind of scare us. Do you want to comment on that in your diplomatic ways?
Yeah, I think, yeah, so it's working. I think you were right. I mean, there were a lot of examples where individual would choose the easier way. The individuals, but also a country or specific group of people would choose the easier way. But you know that there is this famous Venn diagram which says that there is your comfort zone, and when you go out from your comfort zone, that's basically your growth zone. So you pointed out quite nicely, and there were also research done by a lot of researchers that growth happens when you really when you interact with diverse mindset, people from diverse background, and who challenges your ideas. So yeah, and in science diplomacy, science diplomacy itself is not new. It's happening since, we can give the example of CERN, it's happening since the early 1950s. And you would need, the reason why in science diplomacy, the culture, the diversity is very important, because if you look at in the past couple of years, a lot of countries are putting resources and efforts to building bridges, but mainly to invest on soft power. Yeah? And soft power, why? Because of course, this understanding each other is really needed, but also, if you would like to build bridges, you need to first trust each other. And trust comes when you understand each other. And understanding comes when you understand the context of the other person. Yeah? So I think Karen said it very nicely, that we don't need to agree. That's absolutely fine, but we need to listen to each other. Yeah.
Communication. Yes. Talking about communication, ironically. Yes, that is the key. We have to start somewhere. Speaking of, we would really like this to be an interactive session. So any questions, comments, ideas, I'm going to come to you.
Does it work? Yes? No. Okay. Now? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. It was the volume. Yes. So I have a comment and a question. Regarding the comment, I'm just wondering where in this conversation sits the question of inequalities and decolonizing university. And it's just like I was also thinking of how is it possible to for people who are suffering discrimination, racism, to reach out really to others. So, like, how can we integrate this into our approach? And I was also thinking of the tension that might exist between our thinking and our revision of how the university should be and how academic spaces should be and how research should be, versus how we still have to fight for the recognition of science. So I think that it's a very complicated thing. And maybe I have another question as well. I was just thinking regarding the communication part, that what do you think, how could we in this space where we are sitting, for example, like at the conference, improve these questions, like in the practice, like how could we already build here better communication to understand each other and understand each other's background?
Thank you for the question. Karen, would you like to?
Yeah. I mean, those are obviously not easy questions. To start maybe with the last one on how we can just improve, just starting today, I think one mistake we often make when we feel tension with someone else or misunderstanding with someone else is we often expect the other person to change. And that's very hard. I think the first thing we need to realize that it's always easier for us to change. So that is usually the starting point. I think that is important to realize. I think that is just something that perhaps is not something that we get in the trainings, in the behaviors that are set within our normal environment. So I think that is an important starting point. To start with how we can change ourselves, but also to try to understand where the other person is coming from. And I do think this is actually a community MCAA where a lot of people start with asking questions to others about their background, where they're coming from, where they're working currently. So I think we have good starting points for conversations that are already quite inclusive. But the thing we can probably do more is, if there is tension in a conversation, is to think about how we are approaching the conversation rather than to expect anything different from the person standing in front of us. I think that's maybe the first thing to say there. In terms of how it's possible for people who have a bad experience to reach out, again, it's an important question. It's not easy. And I think it's hard to put the responsibility with them. I think the responsibility sits with everyone else. So I think we need systematic changes where it becomes easier for people to speak up, where they also feel like they have allies around them, that they will be supported if they do, and those structures are not in place currently. There's definitely initiatives that are starting to happen to accommodate this. I think about in the UK we have support lines that are anonymous for people to be able to at least have a conversation and a starting point to start thinking about how they can approach a difficult situation. But I think we are quite far from solutions that are embedded at the moment, and there's quite a lot of work ahead of us. But I think it's important that we move away, because a lot of the responsibility on inclusion and diversity has set with those communities who are minorized, and that is something that needs to change. It will need to be the people who are not in minority who will need to take responsibility and take the most of the burden on them, and we are not quite there yet, but I think we are making small steps in getting there.
As Karen said, these are really important questions, but not easier one. And there are, in a lot of cases, regarding your first question, there are no formal system to report. But just to mention a couple of existing systems, it may not work properly. If you are part of any MSCA project, for example, MSCA has a clear system. Either you go to your university, if it doesn't work, you can go to the project officer, but there is another really important support system of MSCA, and these are the national contact points. So MSCA and national contact points, I mean, I have a lot of experience with them over the past 6 years through MSCA Net and Net for Mobility Plus, and they do really support researchers. As the chair and the vice chair of the association, we received complaint from the fellows about their project, and then we pass it to the national contact points, and they try, well, I wouldn't say that all the cases were solved, because also national contact point has limited capacity, but you will be heard, you will be supported. And same for MCAA. You could come, if it is related with the MSCA, you could come to us. We would try to connect with the relevant person. In fact, if I'm not wrong, one of the NCP is actually sitting here in this room. So then another point, in MCAA, we have started actually from yesterday, if I'm not wrong, the whistleblowing project. This is actually to report if you think, that there are something happening with you, you could report, but this is for the inside MCAA. Once this pilot is done, this may be translated into something bigger. That's the ultimate plan. Probably we will be able to help there. But till then, if you're an MCA member, and if you think that you have issues with the MSCA project, you can always reach out to us. Again, we may not be able to solve your issue, but we will be here with you. Thank you.
Yes, regarding how it is possible. Is it working now? How is it possible? Regarding the question on how it is possible for people suffering any kind of discrimination or harassment to reach out, I take the title of this session. There is no solution that fits all. And I think the context can also be very important in the course of action to take, because sometimes we are within settings that have a very toxic environment, or there are settings where there are no healthy boundaries around certain topics. And also sometimes we lack this. And also sometimes we ourselves lack the skills in conflict management on how to best manage a conflict. Having said this, I think that empathy and active listening can go a long way. And sometimes more than being provocative or withdrawing ourselves from the situation, I think it's important to reach out with an open mind to try to understand why that person said this or did that or is acting like that. Because if you give that, this is getting frustrating. If you get that person the chance to explain, maybe that person also gives you the chance to explain your point of view, and both of us can then change behaviors into a more harmonious relationship. Finally, I wanted to also say that sometimes we can also try to explain or talk about specific biases that we suspect are happening by raising awareness about this topic and creating a meaningful conversation about the biases that you are particularly worried about. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Goodness gracious me. Thank you for your questions. Do we have any more from the floor? Anna? Yeah.
I just wanted to make, can you hear me? Okay. No?
Okay, the microphone over there is not working.
Okay. Just wanted to make a comment about the question that was brought up, because I know in academia it can be quite tricky even reaching out to, if the structure is there, you can risk your career sometimes, depending on the situation. But the one factor that might be helpful, and I found it, is if we can put junior people in contact with independent mentors. Mentoring can have a very helpful impact, because in this case, people who have gone through this route or path might give some, share their experiences or things that worked out or not. Sometimes that's helpful.
Thank you. Oh, goodness.
If I can just quickly, I fully agree with you. No, it's okay. Fully agree with you. Mentoring can actually play a really important role. And we have seen that because MCAA had or still has a referent mentoring program. This was basically to provide mental health support to the Mary Skłodowska Action current fellows. So we have seen that program we ran for more than 2 years or 2 terms. It was quite successful because we had a trained mentor, and mentee can share their experiences and direct it to. Following on that, these are the reason why MCAA is right now actually opening the MCAA Academy, which is a mentoring platform. I think there is a session tomorrow, so I invite you to join, and then you will see.
Yeah, I can just maybe add to that I think at the moment it is challenging, partly because of the way that power relationships work in academia. I think we know that a lot of problems are really linked to the supervisor-supervisee relationship, and often people feel that their career partly depends on in how far that they get along with that supervisor. So I do think there's also different solutions to think about there in terms of, for example, the importance of a reference letter. Why do we need a reference letter from the PI? Can we get reference letters from colleagues, maybe from someone you have supervised? Are there other people we can ask questions to, so that we dilute some of those relationships and hopefully make those problems, dilute those problems in that way, where not everything hangs on one relationship. So I think, again, it's difficult now, but I do think there are solutions that are being explored again in this space as well. So lots of work for professionals in those areas to continue these discussions.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, it's working now. Thank you for that. It's very interesting to observe from all the sessions that I've attended so far how conflict and researcher experience just keeps coming out as one of the biggest issues. So I'm quite intrigued. We kind of touched on conflict and how we talk about differences and conflicts. I'm intrigued, like, from people, here in the audience, how many of us actually feel comfortable in our professional life to talk about conflicts or to share if you're, facing discrimination or an issue at work? How many of us actually feel comfortable to talk about it in a professional setting? Wow. And do you have any ideas or needs that you would feel that could equip you to feel more comfortable to talk about conflicts from the audience?
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. One thing which I was thinking about, that indeed there is a lot of diversity when we talk about on such platform like Marie Curie Association. all the researchers are from different part of the world, and the universities, European universities, have a lot of diversity. But when it comes to inclusion, definitely when you see a department or a university, you have different faces, you see different diversity, but there is lack of inclusion. What I feel, that very good university having good reputation, there is a lot of different faces, but then you don't feel like you are part of the university. It gives you, and then someone also pointed out that it's also human behavior, that we tend to cluster or tend to be comfortable with people, like-minded people, people with same country, same background. It's not just about one-way thing, it's also a human tendency. And then answering to the question, definitely no one feels safe, like you always tend to be close to your like-minded people. But then there need to be communication, there need to be a setting where you can actually, express yourself. There need to be forums in not just at the university level, but at the department level, at your different groups level, so that you can actually express. And these dialogues should be more in the university or in your workplace in frequent basis, where you can actually see people coming up and expressing themselves, rather than asking in surveys or just like giving them because no one will report it directly. But when it comes to such kind of events, they can actually express.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, very good point, and I agree with you. I think if we think just about diversity and ticking the boxes of having people look different, we're making progress. But when it comes to actual inclusivity and actually ensuring that all those people feel they belong in that place, we're not quite there yet. There's quite a lot of work to do. Of course, there is a link between... Can we turn... Still going. There is of course a link between, we've had lots of discussions at our organization whether to call it diversity and inclusion or inclusion and diversity. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation. You of course need different people there to then understand what they need to feel included and to feel they belong. But at the same time, to attract those different people, they need to be able to feel they belong. So, it's difficult to understand what has to come first. And in a way, perhaps we first need the diversity, because if we have a group of people who are homogeneous, they won't probably understand what is needed to create an environment where others will belong. So, hopefully we are in that sense on the right track. But yeah, there is quite a bit of work to do.
Yes, I was going a little bit down the same way, which is we cannot talk about cultural diversity without talking about sense of belonging, right? And I think for those people who actually see that their institution is trying hard, but still you don't feel that you belong, I think the question, then you need kind of help your institution to get there, right? And the question to ask is, what do I need to see happening so that I feel that I belong here? And maybe if you do that exercise, either yourself or with a group of colleagues, maybe you can actually help in a healthy way your institution to make small steps in that direction, so that right now you and that group of colleagues can feel that things are evolving, and the next people joining the institution will not face that same barrier. Another thing I wanted to mention, and I just take this opportunity, is related to the comment before. We've mentioned mentoring and peer support, and regarding peer support, I think it's really, really important, but I think it's also important to be aware of the danger of peer support, because sometimes this peer support can be can actually serve as an excuse for us to feel numb about the situation and to not act about that situation. And I just think that is important for us, that if we indeed just want to talk to our work colleagues about this awful thing that happened to us, it's important to not fall into a vicious cycle where you just vent out with your colleagues, and this allows you to just be numb towards that situation. That might not be healthy in the long run for you in terms of mental health and other things. So, yeah.
Yes, definitely agree on that. And we are kind of coming to a close of the session. Do we have any final thoughts, just very extremely briefly? But yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Charlotte. I just want to add that I gave up on racial discrimination recently when I started volunteering for an international organization, and they had set down rules on how to stamp out racism and injustice and so on. And I found out that the people who were actually fighting this are themselves having that problem to, even stop being racially discriminatory. And I just gave up. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy on it, and I was thinking, how can you fight yourself? You are fighting this, but you are this, and then it doesn't really make any sense. So I just want to leave that there. It can be a food for thought.
Thank you for that. I definitely empathize with it. But these are complicated issues, and these are human issues. And I think the one big takeaway from this session is that we have to continue to talk about it, at least talk about it, and stand up for ourselves. And although we do look up to institutions like academia or university or PIs, but it's so important to feel that you deserve to speak out. The consequences come later, but then you have to stand up for yourself because nobody else will. There could be policies around, but at the end of the day, with research mobility, we do deserve, we have a voice, we need to use it. So that's all I can say, and thank you very much to all the panelists here and the audience for joining us today, and I hope you have a lovely evening ahead. Thank you. Cheers.